Today's lesson will cover ethnicity. Currently, the term ethnicity refers to a group of people who share a common identity, but the concept of ethnicity is still quite controversial. To be more specific, ethnicity refers to the identity with a group of people who share cultural traditions of a particular homeland or hearth. Ethnicity involves more than simply physical characteristics associated with race. It also involves a person's perceived social and cultural identity. Nationality is different from ethnicity in that it represents the identity with a group of people who share legal attachment to a certain country. Someone may easily regard their nationality as being different from their ethnicity. For example, someone may immigrate to the United States and regard themselves as nationally a U.S. citizen. Now, the country they emigrated from may have a line of long ancestry that would indicate how they identify their ethnicity. Race is a concept that is even more controversial than the concept of ethnicity. Race is identity with a group of people who are perceived to share a physiological trait, like skin color. It's important to note that race is a social construct. There really is only one human race, but the way that we recognize race today is on the basis of the physical characteristics that we use to separate people. I know that I commonly use my mother as an example in human geography with some of the concepts, but it applies very easily to these three concepts today. So looking at ethnicity, my mother was born in the Philippines, so she regards herself a Filipino woman. That would be her ethnicity. If we looked at nationality, she is a naturalized citizen, so she would regard her nationality to be that of a U.S. citizen. When we look at race, many people, based in her physical characteristics, would categorize her as Asian. Again, as I mentioned, many would argue that these are perceived characteristics, so again, it can be quite controversial. This is especially evident when we see how these perceived differences in characteristics can influence the differences that people experience throughout life and society. It is very difficult to distinguish race and ethnicity, but there are attempts to do so, particularly when it comes to the census. The United States Census, which is taken every 10 years, shows a dramatic fashion of the extent to which the American cultural landscape has become truly multicultural. Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and other minority ethnic groups are now part of a culturally diverse polyglot nation in which a clear ethnic majority simply no longer exists. Geographers will try to make sense of the amount of cultural data that's collected through the census. The 2020 census asks questions like the name, sex, ethnicity, age, date of birth, and race of each person in the home, whether each person is of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, and the relationship of each person to a central person in the home. The most striking ethnic pattern to emerge from early analysis of the census is that the population of Hispanic Americans, particularly Latinos of Mexican origin, have increased dramatically during the last few decades. The increase can be found in states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, and even Illinois. This noticeable demographic shift is impacting US politics, as politicians may have very aggressive stances when it comes to immigration. Next, we're going to talk about migration and distribution of US ethnicities. 13% of the US population is African American, although the term African American can be perceived to be inappropriate. Some may identify as being African American, while others prefer to identify as being Black. Most African Americans are descendants of slaves, and this was due to the height of the slave trade that was between 1710 and 1810. And this is also known as the triangular slave trade, where we're looking at this trade relationship between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. There are several reasons that individuals may not identify as being African American. One, individuals may not want to be distinctively different from that as any other American, so may prefer to just be referred to as an American. Second, many don't know much about the roots of their African heritage. So, not knowing that makes it difficult for them to identify with African relation. So, with that being said, they may prefer to identify as being Black or part of the Black community. You'll also see people refer to themselves as persons of color. Also, keep in mind that identifying as a person of color is quite broad. Many people regard themselves persons of color if they are not white or perceived to be white. In addition to forced migration or colonization, voluntary migration also impacts the demographic makeup of the United States. As we learned about in the migration unit, immigration laws were changed in the 1960s and 70s, and this impacted an influx of people from Asia as well as Latin America. We can look at some demographic concentrations here. So in the top left, you will see that African Americans make up large concentrations of the South. Hispanics make up large concentrations of the southern region as well as the West Coast. We also see that Asian Americans make up a large percentage of the West Coast, particularly in California, but we see pockets throughout the US. And Native Americans are more concentrated on the West as well as the Midwest. And then we also see a concentration in Oklahoma, which in large part may be due to the historical Trail of Tears. The next topic we are going to cover is ethnic enclaves. An ethnic enclave is a high concentration of a particular ethnicity that is different from the surrounding area. So why do enclaves form? Well, these enclaves help immigrants adapt. So they can be around people who they are most familiar with. There might be a common economic setting. The language is familiar, as many people who are in these regions may be able to communicate better with each other. They may share a common religion, and it could be considered a sanctuary, a place of comfort and familiarity. A specific city that we can see very obvious spatial patterns as they associate with ethnic enclaves is Los Angeles. Los Angeles is very ethnically diverse, and ethnicities often grouped together. Take a look at the map on the right showcasing the ethnic enclaves of Los Angeles. So the first color we'll look at indicate regions that are primarily made up of Asian Pacific Islanders. That's in red. And then we've got the kind of greenish yellow color, and that is going to indicate regions that are majority Hispanic. We have the greenish color, which is going to indicate majority Black communities or regions. And then the white areas are going to indicate a majority Anglo, basically Caucasian or white areas. And then the brown ones are going to be much more diverse, so you don't have a distinctive majority reflected in those regions. Here are just a few examples of enclaves in LA. Chinatown, Olvera Street, which is a Mexican district, Koreatown, Little Tokyo, Little Armenia, Thai Town, Little Ethiopia, as well as historic Filipino town. There are various Chinatowns that exist in cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Believe it or not, Folsom used to have the second largest Chinatown in the country. Many fires had been experienced with Folsom's Chinatown, and so the town eventually ended up dying out. It was not revived, and many say that this was a consistent problem, and the fires were rumored to have been set by white supremacists in the area. There have been some trends of changing ethnic enclaves where we see more ethnic concentrations in the suburbs, also known as ethnoburbs. So an example of this would be Dearborn, Michigan, where there's a large Arab population that also happen to practice the religion of Islam. So it's very common to see mosques and different types of Middle Eastern restaurants and grocery stores, and the most commonly spoken language there being Arabic. Next, we're going to talk about segregation by race. We have seen a separation of races through laws, both historically, but we can also argue that these laws currently exist. Many would say they no longer are in effect. However, again, there are some laws that do contribute to systematic inequities. There are also impacts where we see that ethnicities and their distribution are evident through spatial patterns. Through the famous court case Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, this Supreme Court case allowed for separate but equal accommodations, meaning that the races could be segregated so long as their accommodations were equal. We obviously know that those accommodations were not equal, and so this segregation was eventually overturned with the passing of the Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated public schools. The time frame between these two court cases, Plessy v. Ferguson from 1896 and the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954, created Jim Crow laws. Between the Plessy case in 1896 and the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954, there were Jim Crow laws that were instituted throughout the South. And these Jim Crow laws definitely served for not equal accommodations. Jim Crow laws made it so that Black people were made to sit in the back of buses and shops. There were separate schools that were not equal, and restaurants and hotels could choose to serve only whites. Segregation was not unique to the United States. Apartheid in South Africa was also a form of segregation. Under apartheid, separation of races were distinguished into geographic areas. Under this system, a newborn baby was classified as being one of 4 government-designated races, either black, white, colored, which was mixed with white and black, or Asian. The system was created by descendants of whites who arrived in South Africa from the Netherlands in 1652. The white minority government of South Africa repealed the apartheid laws in 1991. And the principal anti-apartheid organization, the African National Congress, was led by Nelson Mandela. South Africans were permitted to vote in the national election for the first time in 1994, and Mandela was overwhelmingly elected the country's first Black president. The next topic to cover is ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is a purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian. With the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, Serbia took direct control of Kosovo and launched a campaign of ethnic cleansing against the Albanian majority. Another example of ethnic cleansing pertains to Yugoslavia. However, this includes the Serbs that expelled around 170,000 Croats and other non-Serbs from the eastern part of Croatia in the attempt of trying to declare its own region or country. This is where the term Balkanization comes from, since this region of Yugoslavia is in the Balkans region. But Balkanization is a process by which a state breaks down through conflicts among its ethnicities. Ethnic cleansing can lead to something more serious. Competition among ethnicities can lead to a handful of more extreme cases of ethnic cleansing, known as genocide. This is a mass killing of a group of people in an attempt to eliminate an entire group from existence.